like to make an introduction of Mr. Trevor Williams, who's moderator for second session of day 2, which is titled as Impact of COVID-19 on Global Supply Chains. This topic has come several times in this event of today, yesterday and today. And Mr. Trevor is a managing editor of Global Atlanta, very popular man. Everybody knows. Anybody in Atlanta who's involved in international affairs or academic, etc., government knows Trevor very well. He's a versatile digital journalist. Trevor has spent more than a decade writing on international business and trade for Global Atlanta, an online news service covering Atlanta's intersection with the global economy. He has undertaken journalism trips to 30 plus countries on 5 continents. Wow. Uncovering stories that reveal both the perils and promise of globalization and its ramification for his home state. Trevor focuses intently on Asia and also has written extensively on foreign direct investment, trade and exports, Georgia's ties with China, and Atlanta's emergence as a payment hub among the topics. Trevor graduated from UGA with dual degrees in magazine journalism and religion, as well as a minor in Chinese language and literature. He is a proud husband and father of 2 young sons, as well as editor of book magazine Making Men 5 Steps to Growing Up. Trevor, take it away, sir.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this. Obviously, this forum every year is a landmark venture for Georgia Tech and for UIBS, and I'm glad to be a part of it this year. We've really enjoyed seeing all the great content that you've been able to put out and all the amazing executives that you brought to the table. And this panel today is no different. So I'm going to go ahead. I think I'm going to introduce everybody at once, and then I'll bring everybody back in. I think we're going to start with Mr. Kumar with some presentations, and I'm assuming that y'all have those queued up and ready to go. But
there are 2 presentations, Rahul and Chris.
And then we will have some discussion afterwards. We'll bring in BDA as well to speak about his business. And then hopefully I think we'll have some time for Q&A from the audience, if I understand correctly. So we'll start with Mr. Rahul Kumar. He's working as Managing Director of Lactalis India, managing 3 companies, Tirumala, Anik, and Prabhat. Lactalis, and I'm sorry to say I didn't know this, but Lactalis is the largest dairy group in the world with annual revenues of $23 billion. But previously he worked for the company that I do know of in India, Amul Dairy, for 11 years, from 2003 to 2014. Mr. Kumar has experience of 29 years in the dairy sector, graduate with a degree in chemical engineering from the IIT Roorkee, was chosen for a management course at the Institute of Rural Management Anand, and then joined Amul after that. So we're kind of going backwards through your bio, Mr. Kumar. And then so he was, when he became managing director, and this is humbling for me as a 37-year-old, he was, kind of makes me wonder what I'm doing with my life, but he became managing director of Amul at 33 years old. And then more recently, of course, has been instrumental in Lactalis Group's entrance into the Indian dairy market. And they've acquired 3 companies over the last 7 years. So I'm sure he's been busy. And he's been working on tech and IT interventions to improve efficiencies, and particularly in the supply chain, and adding value across the IT chain. So I'm gonna come back to you, Mr. Kumar, and start your presentation. But I wanted to introduce our other panelists as well. And Chris, you have to forgive me. Is it Raymond?
Yeah, Raymond, you're correct.
Okay, good. Just gotta make sure I'm getting it right. Yes. So Chris is retired Vice President of Industrial Projects Asia Pacific and CEO of the US for DHL Global Forwarding. And I'm going to let you explain the difference, all the different parts of DHL. But this is, the basically the one that's enabling global trade. We'll just say that. But managed across Asia, particularly in India and Indonesia, as country manager or CEO, or actually CEO for the US, but then country manager for India and Indonesia previously. I'm going to kind of skim through here. As CEO in the USA, steered the company's reorganization and global transition, managed and sponsored some of the key global accounts at that time, And then back when he was in India and Indonesia, continued to grow revenues and increase exposure to the Indian market, expanded the network in Indonesia, which of course, as we know, is an archipelagic country, right, with lots of logistical challenges when you're going across. I think it's something like 7,700 islands, so kudos to you there. But I was interested to see this at the bottom here. You graduated as a shipping merchant from the commercial school in Zurich, Switzerland, and the military recruitment school in Fribourg, Switzerland. So that was really interesting. I didn't know you could major in being a shipping merchant, so that's pretty cool. And then lastly, but not least, of course, we have Didier Arnaud. Didier is the Chief Operating Officer for Monarch Beverages and the owner of Epicurean Food and Beverages. Didier is here in Atlanta, so glad to know you. I think you're here in Atlanta. You got your,
I am.
beverage background there, so I can't really tell geographically where you are. And what I love this panel here because we've got France, India, and the US really well represented here. But Didier, French native, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. After 7 years in coal trading and utilities in France, he joined Dassault, a division of Thales, which is a huge company. Then serving as director of finance, and then was transferred from France to Atlanta at that point in I think 1993. So you made it before the Olympics.
97, actually.
Oh, 97. Okay,
Yes,
so a little bit
yes,
after then.
97.
Sorry.
Just after.
And then after 7 years with Dassault, joined as CFO in 2001, if I got the year right, Monarch Beverages, maker of Moxie. I didn't know that. I had a Ted Williams, baseball player poster in my room that said "Make mine Moxie," when I was little.
Not many people know that brand.
That's interesting. Dad's Root Beer, Nesbitt's, and other soda brands, and then let's see. Now working all across the world, emerging markets in Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America, and then you acquired Epicurean Food and Beverages, okay, and then growing that around the world as well. So we've got obviously a great panel, and y'all don't want to hear me talk, so I am going to turn it over to Mr. Kumar to give us his experience. Obviously, this pandemic has been crazy for everyone in terms of how they adapt their business, with lockdowns and logistical challenges everywhere. So I'll be interested to hear from each of you about your experiences in your particular markets and areas of expertise and industry. So Mr. Kumar, why don't you start us off, please?
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, my co-panelists. And thank you, Trevor, for introduction. We had a very, very unprecedented last 2 years. And I was very happy to see the topic of the session on the impact on global supply chain. And I thank Annie for giving me opportunity to share my experience in this part of the world where we are talking about second most populous country, that is India, with 1.3 billion people. So basically, it all started that in March 2020. It was a little bit later than what number of cases we had in Europe, and it was a really unprecedented event for all of us, for entire humanity. We are talking about, and Mr. Modi, our Prime Minister, he declared the lockdown and for 1.3 billion people, and gave only 4 hours. And at the night, 8 o'clock, he came on the TV and said from tomorrow at 12 o'clock in the night, there will be a complete lockdown in the country. And even people were not aware what exactly is lockdown and what exactly we are talking about. So it was a great shock, I would say, for the billion people in India. Only 4 hours were given, and everything was standstill. All these trucks were standstill. Factories were closed. No movement and all these things. So it was a really great shock. And okay, then we managed first wave. There was not much number of cases as compared to second wave and all this thing, but it just give a big jolt to the entire economy and our first quarter economy, because in India, the financial year starts from April, and the lockdown was declared on 25th March. So first quarter economy was down by minus 29%. First quarter GDP was down by minus 29%. It was great shock when the India GDP was not at that rate of 8 to 9%, but it was 6.5%. And from 6.5% growth in first quarter of lockdown, it went to minus 29%. And this was a really bad news for our entire economy. Then it's not only lockdown, but it crashed the economy. But you know that India is a country of people where there are millions and millions small scale, medium and enterprises where people are working as a labor, as a daily wager, as a worker, as an operator, and entire thing was closed, and the huge number of population went jobless, and about 18 million people they became jobless in the first lockdown period, and it's not only job losing the job, but they have to migrate. They have to go to their home to get some food because there's no income. So they were a mega migration from cities like Bombay and Delhi, and you could see that some pictures where people are just going to their villages or to their small towns where they belong, and because there was no trains, the train was also not running, buses were not running, so it was a big mess, and this has really impacted the entire vibrancy of this country. And after that, when we have such a jolt in economy, normally in other countries, in developed countries, a government gives a lot of help to the people, but in India, that to give this so many people about still Indian government provided 800 million people free ration. Till date they are providing. So this is a big burden on the government. So when the government is burdened with the social kind of initiatives, it is very difficult to help the industry simultaneously or running the economy with the government help. It becomes very difficult. And then that fuel prices in India or all across world started rising in the second wave. So it is a mix of so many things on the entire economy, the social economic conditions and all these things. So it was very difficult. And when we talk about this, it's really the entire supply chain was broken. I give you a small example, because India is a vast country. From east to west is about 3,500 kilometers, and from north to south it is about 3,500 kilometers. And that within the state there is a lot of movement, and some states are producing some goods and others are consuming, and all these things. It's a countries within one country, so it's a lot of movement, and everything becomes standstill. And then what happened after the lockdown? Government says only essential commodities are allowed. Now I'm the dairy industry. Milk is an essential commodity, so milk movement was allowed. But when you get the milk in the plant, and then you need packaging material to pack the milk, and to get the packaging material, there has to be packaging industry, and the packaging industry is not under essential commodity. And for packaging industry, they need plastic. That is not essential commodity, or granules, or they need ink to print, or they need ethanol to dilute the milk. And those commodities or those items are not under essential commodity, so their movements are not allowed. So now then the printing will not done on the packaging material. The packaging industry will not be allowed to work, because that does not come under essential commodity. And then the workers are not there, because their movements are restricted. So even in dairy industry or even in the food processing industry, we don't have packaging material. So this kind of interlinking with one industry to another industry, it created a havoc. And we cannot use we don't have packaging material, or maybe corrugated boxes, or maybe any other thing, or maybe anything which is very essential to produce dairy product, but it doesn't come under essential product. So that those were the very great difficulties, and it's really created big supply chain breakage in our systems. Another point I would like to mention, that India opened its economies in 1991. So it was a 30 years of globalization. When we talk globalization, we are talking about opening the economy. We are exporting, we are importing, To export, we are importing something from China, from Europe, from USA, from other countries, and then we are exporting. And this become a kind of a rugged last 30 years rugged globalization, where the boundaries are open, and now again suddenly the lockdown is there, the ports are closed, and the import of is not possible. There is some geopolitical situation where people have emotional outburst towards China, and then the Chinese container were not unloaded, the customs are not clearing it, there was a diplomacy and all this thing. So it really created a lot of issues in terms of running the industry. And that India was importing, is still importing a lot of goods from China. Total 18% of India's total import is from China, and that is basically for raw material or some components or all this thing for small industries, big industries, automobiles, electronics, TV, all electronic goods. So really it was a very, very difficult situation during those days, and we know that all of us have faced that. So and another very coming to the food industry, because I would like to mention about food industry, especially dairy. There's a massive demand destruction, because everything was closed. So what we call it HoReCa segment, and hotel, restaurant, canteen, caterers, there was no function. So we had big demand destruction of commodities like milk. And milk production was not stopped, because that was the cows and buffaloes were giving milk as they used to give, and then there was a 30-40% demand destruction. So there was a flooding of milk in the system, and all the dairies were finding very difficult to handle that much 30-40% more milk which was coming to the dairy, because and they could not manufacture the product where they used to make to sell, because there was no market. The hotels were closed. So we are talking about cheese, or we are talking about other products, and cottage cheese and all these things which were used in the hotels, and even milk also for cafeterias and all this thing. So all this thing created huge inventory imbalance, and we used to get a lot of milk, and we have no option but to dry it. And drying is also has a capacity constant. So and we cannot say no to the farmer, because then it becomes very, very difficult to to sustain the business in the future. So we wanted to help to the farmers. So we started getting more and more milk without any market, having huge inventory, having huge working capital blockage, and not making the product, and don't have any clue that when it would be over. So that was a big difficulty what we have faced, and really it was very, very bad in terms of I just would like to also mention not only the food industry or all this thing, but the sectors what really affected in India. I'm more concentrating on India this thing. So another one of the major sector which was affected because of this supply chain disturbance, the auto sector. We have a big automobile industry which is close to about 7.5% of India's GDP. And we both import and export to our, we import a lot of auto components, and we export a lot of auto components as well as automobile items. So this was a big item. And this, please understand one thing, that India, when we talking about any industry, it's not only the percentage of GDP or business. It's the basically livelihood of millions and millions of people, because that is very, very important. And when that system, when that aspect is affected, it becomes very, very difficult to manage that. Millions of people are employed in auto auxiliaries units, and if something happens there, it becomes very, very difficult for everybody. But then it creates a lot of social issues. People are jobless, they're poor, they don't have any job, they don't know when the industry will be open. They have gone back to their home, there also they don't have any job because they were doing job in other cities, and then becomes a very, very, very complicated situation. Same is the electronic goods. We had a major dependency on China, Taiwan, South Korea, huge disruption. So we saw that there's a huge increase in the prices of electronics item, in fact shortage of so many items, and lot of issues in terms of electronics goods. Gems and jewelries, we for everybody it's a luxury items, okay. Gems and jewelry, but it is 77% of India's GDP, and millions of people are involved in that. When we have India is the largest diamond polishing and diamond cutting industry, and this is just because of a very, very skilled and cheap labor. and thousands and thousands of people are there in cities like Surat in Gujarat, where it's a hub of diamond cutting. But if you don't have that business, then a lot of people becomes jobless and unemployed and all this thing. So basically, what I meant to say that it's really disrupted the entire social condition in India. Rather than you can evaluate in the terms of business. Okay, some few $1 billion business here and there, but really the supply disruption has really created a lot of social impact on this. Next slide. Now coming to the impact on dairy and food processing, what is our experience I'm talking about? As you know, the Lactalis is the largest dairy company in the world, based as France, and we started doing business in India from 2014, and we were very aggressive in terms of acquiring the dairies and all this thing, and we acquired 7 dairies and 7 companies in last 7 years, including last 2 years of COVID. So basically we are already acquired 3 companies in 5 years, because we could not do anything in last 2 years because of COVID and restriction of travel and all. So basically we had a big issue in terms of our impact on key raw material ingredients availability, because of the globalization. We started importing a lot of ingredients, a lot of components of the any dairy products from other countries. Just for example, we have a big business of curd, what we call yogurt. Okay, now yogurt, the culture, what we use, culture is very, very small quantity. What we have to do, we used to import. Now this all started affected. So we have a big issue in terms of even providing a basic item of dairy industry. So this was a big issue. Our capex were totally halted, because we have a lot of projects where dairy machineries and other projects are imported from Europe, Germany, and France and Italy. It leads to a lot of cost and time over, and that was a big issue. It's very small things like when we collect the milk, we test with for antibiotic. Very, very small thing. And that for antibiotic, the test kits were till that time we were importing from China. And it suddenly stopped because customers were not clearing that, or there was some problem. So basically, just to for this bottleneck, we had a big impact on our production, because in any industry, the antibiotic milk is only 2%. Now to segregate 2%, we have to test it, and if you don't test it, the entire milk could be antibiotic contaminated, and then we cannot supply to our supplier who are making baby food or chocolates in Mondelez or Abbott or a GSK. It becomes very, very difficult for us to do that. Same as the protective equipment. I will not go into details of that. The PPE equipments all across, it was imported from China and other countries. So as I already mentioned about logistic issues, mismatch of warehousing capacity, because when we keep manufacturing the goods which we don't require right now, but there was no option. So this was a big disruption. Learning and way forward, I would say every crisis gives us some opportunity to learn, to reset our mindset and working and strategy and action plan. So now we have started more thinking about more locally. So this is one example where antibiotic cases are 100% imported. There is an institute in India which is called National Dairy Research Institute, NDRI, which is in Karnal. They immediately within 6-7 months they started putting their own kits which we locally produce. So we have now started using that. What I mean to say, now the dependency on so many outsourced items is there. Same as the packaging materials. We have started putting, a lot of packaging material was imported in terms of cheese and all these things, plastics and all. We are developing local market. The one more thing was, I'm not going to details, but one very critical things just to avoid the disruption of supply chain, multitasking of team. Earlier, used to have mindset that this fellow will work only in this department, another department. But now this has changed, because we thought that we have to multi-skill our people, so that if so one workshop is not working because of COVID case, another workshop people can work there. So this is what I would just try to explain, and but we'll bounce back. Things are now okay. Things are improving. Thank you very much.
Definitely. I want to come back to the bounce back part, because I think that's very important for us to talk about. It's not just the crisis, but it's how we learn from it, like you said, how we take the crisis and find the opportunity. So I think we want to move on to Chris. I think you've got a presentation as well, and then we'll bring in Didier at after that.
Yes. So good morning, Atlanta. Good morning, US. Thank you very much, Trevor, for the kind introduction. Yes, I saw. I mean, we obviously heard from Rahul how difficult it was as a manufacturer, as a producer on what happened during COVID. I want to talk a bit from more from the logistics side, from the supply chain. Give you a quick recap on what happened in the last probably 20 months since COVID started. Where is the world today? And what are the opportunities business can leverage on to learn from this event and master the future? So in early 2020, COVID triggered a global reaction, as you just heard from Rahul, quite drastic for social life, for all aspects of life across the world, which somehow we can put it maybe like the perfect storm. You might remember there was actually a movie based on a true story with many events coming together at the same time, creating a tremendous storm in the US North Atlantic. Back to this scheme here is, I think it took the world a while to understand the severity of COVID. But in early March, countries around the world started to shut down public life. As we just heard, India got 4 hours. I think others were probably a bit more generous, but simply, government saw the need to immediately fight the spread of the infection, and it had a profound impact on the supply chain as well. Globally, companies, buyers across the world started to cancel and reduce their orders in anticipation of the significant reduction in demand. Many production sites, again, Rahul, great example in India, but also the rest of Asia, production site had to close down by government regulation or reduce at least their activities. And that had an almost immediate effect on logistics. Air traffic didn't come to a standstill, but it was reduced by about 80–90%, at least in the beginning. It recovered somewhat in the week thereafter. Most of the air freight cargo globally is actually carried not by full cargo planes, it's carried by the passenger planes in the belly. And the simultaneous huge demand on PPE and mask ventilators put an additional choke on the air cargo capacity around the world. For the shipping lines, it was no different. They also reacted and reduced their calls and frequencies, responding to the expected downturn of cargo to be shipped. And what then happened, I guess, took everybody by surprise. The economies actually kept somewhat steaming ahead, or most economies, certainly the US. And the demand increased very strongly after a few weeks, right? Which was caused by additional discretionary spending people had for physical goods, partly because of the funds which were distributed by governments, partly because people didn't spend that money anymore on going on vacation or going out for dining. So they had additional money, which they spent, on all kinds of things which they used at home, electronics, bicycles, you name it, anything which has to do with home, right? The demand was well over the available capacity mostly from the shipping lines, well over the capacity of ports and anybody else involved in the chain. Goods started to be held at transit point. And if you look back at the timing, the first countries which went into lockdown was mostly Asian countries, particularly China, right? Followed then by the Western world, Europe, and the US. So when US went into so-called lockdown or reduction, China slowly came back up and started to produce again, right? And that created a tremendous volume, which was not the system wasn't able to handle, right? If you look, by example, at Los Angeles and Long Beach, which are probably about 40% of the total imports into the US come through these two ports. They saw within weeks a 30% increase in ships and almost a 50% increase in container traffic, right? So the industry was obviously looking for alternatives, shipping instead of through Los Angeles, you go through maybe Houston or New Orleans, or you move to the East Coast, Savannah, Charleston, New York. But those alternatives were exhausted pretty quickly. Cargo arriving in the US was unable to timely reach the customers due to the delay at the port. There was also a lack of warehouse space across the US, and it's still so today, and a severe shortage of truckers and drivers. And to add to the misery, of course, the wildfires in California added to capacity reduction on the rails, which is extremely important to bring goods into the Midwest centers, right? All of this created that the transit time from China to the US doubled from roughly a little bit a month or over a month to about 2.5 months. That also meant that any container which was finally delivered in the US and returned empty to the port didn't return back to Asia in time for the next load. In fact, it also then took another 2 months to return back, which created not just a capacity shortage on the ships, but now also created a capacity or an equipment shortage for people to load the container. So once you have run around and you got your space on the ship, then you had now to run around and find actually an empty box, right? It is estimated that all of this increased the budget, the logistic budget of companies by about 30%, right? Large companies such as Home Depot or Walmart, by example, they have obviously deep pockets. They were able to charter their own aircrafts, their own ships. But for smaller business, mid-sized business, this situation created basically a life-threatening or a business-threatening situation, where in the end the high costs could no longer justify that they would import their ware, particularly if you work maybe in low-cost areas such as furniture and some other things. So you can see that COVID, while it wasn't really the cause or not the only cause, it was for sure the reason for the first domino to fall and trigger basically a landslide across the whole supply chain, which was built over 2 or 3 decades on the globalization theme, right? Or just in time, right? Everything had to be just in time, no inventory. And then when delays occurred, the size of what happened here in COVID, then of course the system was no longer to be able to cope. If you can switch to the next slide, please. This is just a recap, and I'll let you read through this of where we are today. Even after almost 2 years, companies are still trying to catch up, right? There are, as you can see, presently roughly about 100 ships waiting in LA, more to come. There are also, at the alternative port, I'm talking Georgia, just have a look at Savannah, right? 20, 30 ships waiting to be discharged. And that's obviously a very expensive undertaking, right? If you know that these ships cost anywhere, depending on the size, from $10,000 to $20,000, $30,000 a day, right? And some of these ships have been waiting for weeks to get a berth, right? So the high demand for transportation capacity is pretty unbroken. And as of today and of today's situation, we would expect, or the industry expect, that it returns somewhat to normal, probably end of second quarter next year. And that is only if everything works well and you don't have a reoccurrence and reoccurring lockdown of manufacturing and of countries like we have seen in the past. And the signs out of Europe presently aren't that good. The reliability in terms of to calculate, I loaded my container yesterday. When do I get my goods in the USA is an all-time low. For the US, it's roughly about 10-15% of all shipments arrive as planned. How did people cope now for Black Friday and Christmas? They simply moved their orders up if they could. They were told that if they would like to have it for Black Friday and Christmas, they need to make sure it's shipped out of Asia, by example, mid-end of August. Otherwise, it wouldn't reach on time. What we have seen is that because of these early orders, the peak season, which typically happened from September to November, wasn't so severe. But that doesn't mean that everybody will get, unfortunately, their present on time. The next test will be prior and after the lunar year in Asia, which again, particularly China, Taiwan, and other countries shut down for a few days. China, most likely for a whole week. So we will see again a rise at the end of January, early February, when the factories, before the factories close, and they try to push out as much as they have. However, I think with the reopening of business everywhere, we can expect that some of the money which is spent on goods are now going back to be spent on services. There's no real remedy because of the severity of and the size of the impact. I talked about people switching to the Gulf and East Coast port, but those have, were quickly filled up. Generally, these are good times to review your suppliers. Do you have the right suppliers? You have enough suppliers? Keep looking out for new opportunities. There are new opportunities. One of the shipping line has recently opened a service into Prince Rupert, including guarantees from the railway for connectivity into the Midwest. But it's all patchwork. Real recovery really only happens once COVID is mastered and consumer spending switches back to pre-pandemic levels.
Right. Didier, tell us about how this has all affected your business. I mean, you're active all over the world in emerging markets, and I would assume that you face in places like Africa, you're going to face supply chain issues all the time. So, and the beverage business, you try to be as local as you can. You try to be as close to the end customer as you can. So, I would assume that you are knowledgeable and well positioned during this time of upheaval to really take some of those lessons and adapt.
First, thanks, Chris, for the additional stress. I don't think I needed that, but it's something we will have to deal with next year. Yeah, so two businesses, right? Monarch Beverages, which exports concentrates finished products from the US, from Europe, and from Asia to emerging markets. We do 90%, 95% of our business in emerging markets and almost 80% in Africa alone. And on the other side, Epicurean does only finished goods from Europe from France, in this case, to North America, Canada, and the US. So very different perspectives. On the US side, I think there was a first phase of denial, which was, this is gonna blow over, this is gonna improve. Everybody was thinking that. At the same time, my demand exploded. Whether it was 2020 or 2021, I'm growing at 30 to 40% a year. Very strong demand from grocery stores. I don't do much in home delivery, in food service. So I benefited a lot from the increase in demand. The demand hasn't really slowed down. Obviously, the biggest impact for me is cost. I do not do any Asia to US transactions, so it's been pretty okay, I would say, in terms of delays. The worst has been the West Coast, as everybody knows. So sending a container from Europe to the West Coast, which was taking a few weeks, now is taking 4 to 5 months, which is kind of ridiculous. But so I'm to the point where I'm actually importing in New Jersey and shipping containers by rail to the West Coast, which cost a little more money, but finally not that much more money. But otherwise, there's no way I can respect my delays. So first phase of denial, then dealing with the cost increases. Obviously, just like Lactalis, we sell low value, high weight products in glass. So we got really impacted by the increase in cost. I waited until the third quarter to increase my prices, which leads us to inflation. First, I started with the small customers. Now I'm at the big customers. So I really think that the 6% we've seen is going to carry on for some time, because the increases I personally put in place will only, I would say, come to fruition for retailers in probably the first and second quarter of 2022. And so that's for the US. Internationally, we doubled sales in the first 6 months of 2021 after a strong increase in 2020. Obviously, at first in Africa, we were afraid that we would be strongly impacted. There hasn't been much lockdowns, as you know, in Africa, not as much as Asia or Europe or the US. So demand remains strong, especially when our bottlers realized that they wouldn't need to slow down. I think for the year, we won't end up at 100% increase, which would be amazing, but we'll still be stronger than we expected, probably around 40 to 50%. Interestingly, the delays haven't impacted that much our business. this, I guess, US to Europe and US to Africa hasn't been impacted as much as it has been in Asia, right? The costs have increased, but interestingly, the raw material cost, at least for beverages, haven't impacted us that much. We have been announced increases from 3 to 5% for next year, which I was surprised was not as much as I would have feared. I was talking to other business people yesterday, and they were talking about increases from 25 to 50%, whether it's ABS, aluminum, and all that. So we've been pretty good. But otherwise, in terms of general comments, I love a crisis. Each time we've had a crisis, whether it was 2008 or COVID, I've seen my businesses go up strongly. I guess we were prepared. not that we are better than anybody else, but I guess for personal reasons, we're in the right spot at that time. But the first thing that really comes to mind for me is how much the well-oiled machine that is international commerce can be disrupted by a grain of salt, right? And interestingly, I do not think this is temporary, and I think it's structural. And I think that the US is probably the worst element in that disruption. I think there are structural issues in the US that are not being addressed, in particular, obviously, transportation. We know that, the drivers, we don't need to come back on that. But I would like to just point out something that is in the news right now, which is infrastructure plan, right? And I'm going to read you the White House announcement on that. Makes the largest federal investment in public transit ever, and makes the largest federal investment in passenger rail since the creation of Amtrak. I do not see anything on freight. I do not see any alternative to trucking. So you have a bottleneck in the US, which has been working great for this country for many years. But I don't see any alternatives, especially now that we're talking about lowering carbon emissions. So the drivers is still going to be an issue. We still don't have autonomous driving for trucks. It will come up, but you're not going to replace the millions of trucks that are on the road overnight. And the pressure, obviously, to lower carbon emissions is going to be worse and worse. So I don't see any improvement in the US, which means it will disrupt international commerce for years to come, obviously with Europe and with China.
Well, if it's been working so well for the US, what incident does the US have to change it, right? Like, are you saying the bottleneck is kind of a competitive advantage in a way in the US? What do you mean?
Not really. For me, I'm able to go around it, I guess. I've been planning, obviously, it has a cost because I have to use more working capital to store product in the US. So I stocked more product. Obviously, I sell beverages, right? So you cannot bring beverages in the winter unless you use a reefer, which, if you think a container is expensive right now, because I'm around $9,000 to $10,000 per container. So I'm getting close to the value of the products. When I was paying 35 to 4,000 before. So when you sell juices and lemonade, it's kind of ridiculous, right? But on top of that, I cannot bring them in December, January, February, or March. So I wouldn't say it's a competitive advantage. It has been in some aspect, because I've had actually customers, clients at retailers that were complaining about getting products with glass, since there is a shortage of glass in the US. Right. We haven't had any supply constraints in Europe so far, although they have started talking about, glass shortages and delays on getting cardboard and paper, labels and all that. But it hasn't been that bad, really.
So how are you thinking about localizing more, or are you thinking about localizing more of your manufacturing, particularly in emerging markets? I mean, it seems like you might be already pretty localized.
We actually, we were pretty good at anticipating, I guess, because we used to only produce in the US. And we started producing in Spain and France 3 or 4 years ago. And at that time, it was mostly for currency exchange risk, and it was delays. And it was delays in supplying, right? So we started to spread, I guess, or decrease our risk by having several suppliers when we used to have way less. we are working with, we are very much a, a 21st century company, right? So we are a marketer of brands. We own the brands, we own the formulas, but we use third-party companies to produce our concentrates. So we expand as our suppliers expand. So if, we are in talks with one of our suppliers to start producing in a country in Africa, because they will start up a plant over there, and that's definitely an option. And even for Epicurean, which is obviously importing products from France, which is a big selling point. I have been considering producing, if I could, some different sizes or stuff like that in the US. But as you know, shortage of cans, shortage of bottles, huge minimum runs. So I don't have the flexibility as a smaller company to take advantage of that. But yeah, I would love to do that otherwise.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Kumar about that. How do you think about localizing it within India? I mean, you were saying certain regions are producers, certain regions are consumers. I would imagine you'd want to distribute that a little bit more, particularly with what we heard about the disruptions to the kind of just-in-time mentality that we've had for a long time.
No, actually, it's a global approach. People have realized that it's better to have localized production, which was happening, which was there 30-40 years back, and then we changed the global manufacturing system. We had a very, very efficient localized system. But after this crisis, I think people have realized. I'm not saying that overnight it's going to change. It's not but still, I think some steps would be there in this direction. Just give you example of India. After this thing, the government policies are now like to have what you call it self-reliant India. Which Mr. Modi and entire is now working on that. And then there's several offshoot of those common approach: self-reliant India, skill India, and all things. So that perhaps this is one step towards that direction. And perhaps I think most of the countries, they have started realizing that. I'm not saying that, at least whatever is possible, it should be within the boundaries. So I think we are working towards a very, very small kind of the deglobalization now. What we did 30 years back, complete globalization. Now it's a deglobalization. I think India is also on that trend.
Yeah. And I want to remind the audience that the Q&A box is open. We've already had one question come in there, but please do put your questions in. I'm going to ask a few of my own, but you're welcome to ask yours, and I'll get to it as you put them in there. So I'm going to bring Chris back in. I'm kind of curious to hear you respond to Mr. Kumar there. Like, the freight really doesn't lie, right? Like, you can look at the freight movements, you can tell where trade is actually happening versus where sentiments seem to be, or where rhetoric lies, right? Like, so what do you see in the actual movement of freight? Do you see that that companies are actually putting their money where their mouth is in terms of, diversifying away from China, for instance, or bringing things back to the US? Like, is that actually taking place in the movements themselves, or is it just something people are talking about?
I mean, partially at the moment is really crisis management, right? Just to get over what you have and get this done. There are companies who have started even before COVID to look at it for reasons I've mentioned. You have geopolitical and trade issues. So you can see companies shifting, not necessarily back to the US. I haven't seen that yet. I'm sure it's there, but you see companies shifting elsewhere in Asia. Right, so Vietnam is extremely popular. Indonesia has been coming to the US and selling the ability to produce in Indonesia. One of the challenges that over the last couple decades, companies have built such a almost perfect supply chain in China with sub-suppliers and all kinds of things, which sometimes go 6-7 layers deep. It's not easy to pick one out, move it to the US or to Mexico, and leave the rest there, right? It needs a lot more planning. But what we know is that companies definitely talk about it, right? I think, and COVID was probably kind of the last straw to tell people we got to do something about this.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and I think Didier mentioned it, is inventory, right? People on the just-in-time have basically cut all inventory, not just excessive, but all inventory. And if you look at the chips, the computer chips, the semiconductor, I think companies need to look at what can I source quickly somewhere else. That's not a problem. and what is critical and takes a long time, and maybe rethink that they should keep certain inventory to master events like this one, right?
Yeah, I was actually, Porsche has their headquarters for the US in Atlanta, and I was down there recently, and they said the steering column, right? Like they usually have an automated steering column where you can raise the steering wheel, and they said they had to make that manual just temporarily because they had to move the chip somewhere else, and
even GM, they announced that they would stop putting heated seats and heated steering wheels because they couldn't get it. But also it will change, I think, the way companies think of security, right? Safety in supply chain. Hyundai announced that they would make their own chips, start making their own chips. And the trend that we've seen over the last 30 years of pushing back to suppliers and third parties, the Apple model, right? They don't make anything, everybody else makes it for them. I think is being rethought by a lot of companies because you can see Hyundai again, going back to them, their sales are soaring in Europe right now because they were, I guess, better at anticipating this crisis. Maybe they stocked more, I don't know. And now they end up having sales, a sales boom in Europe when everybody's going down strongly. So, it's going to be hard to manage, but it's going to change.
Mr. Kumar, are you thinking about more vertical integration in the dairy supply chain because of all this? I mean, are you thinking about owning more of the milk production part as well as, the raising of the dairy itself, or is that something that you already do in your business? You were talking about the farmers and how you really couldn't say no to them at the time, and then of course there's been a lot of unrest.
Yeah, so India is the largest dairy producing country and growing at the rate of 6 to 7% since last many decades. And so basically it's a sunrise industry. There is a and please understand that whatever milk we produce, 97% milk we consume in our domestic market. India export of dairy is only 3%. That also with the commodity through some countries as well as the Indian population settled. Some demand is there. We are not exporter of a big dairy this thing, but it helps very big in big way to the rural economy because about 90 million people families are associated with the dairy. It's a very small scale farmer business here. So, and they know that the market is growing and their production is ensured to be sold and all this thing. The only thing is that to sustain this business with the rising cost and shrinking resources, this one more thing has come up after this crisis is the value addition in dairy products. Now started having more protein in their diet, which in India, which is basically a vegetarian society, most of the protein either comes from pulses or from milk, and that has created a lot of demand for some of the dairy products which are there. So people now think that dairy is a good alternative for protein intake. So basically the industry is good. Of course, the COVID has affected the operational part of the dairy, but as such dairy is growing without any reference to COVID. But the COVID has really given a lot of innovative products for the dairy companies, including Lactalis. Obviously, we started selling a lot of products which are having good protein sources in Indian market.
Right. Didier, we have a go ahead.
Yeah, a question, exactly. That's what I was going to say. David has a question regarding how much, the recommendation is 6 months of cash on hand and how much do I have? I wish I could answer that question with, oh yes, I went to financial school. I'm a finance guy, by the way, by training. So I would love to have 6 months of cash. Unfortunately, this is not how it works for me. From the two companies that I'm owner in, the smaller one, Epicurean, I bought 5 years ago, and it was it's a very small company, right? And I lost my 4 top customers within 6 months. So it's been a journey. It's been difficult. Thankfully, Uncle Sam helped companies last year, which was very welcomed and allowed me to cover my needs, my cash needs. But yeah, I had to fund it personally. So I wish I could put 6 months ahead of me, but that was not the case. And Monarch was a little bit the same. We were able to buy the company because it was in dire straits originally. So we got it for a song. But obviously we had to restart from scratch, and we probably multiply by 10 the revenue from that
Wow.
time on. But again, cash constraints. The good thing, again, I love a crisis. Governments have pushed, whether it's in Europe or in the US, have pushed to help companies. So we were able to get financing from the French government and the US government. Especially when you sell in emerging markets, Africa scares a lot of people, right? It doesn't scare us. We see it as an opportunity. But usually people don't like to invest in those markets. So it's been hard to find financing. So again, the crisis was awesome for us.
Yeah, Chris, I want to ask you something in just a moment, but I wanted to ask Mr. Kumar just while I'm thinking about it. Didier just mentioned acquiring a company for a song in a crisis, right? If your strategy within India is acquiring more and more companies to kind of build up Lactalis's brand presence there, has that been an opportunity at this moment? I mean, have you been able to see some distressed companies become available for purchase? I know some governments have kind of blocked that in the short run, especially when it comes to cross-border acquisitions, but I didn't know if that was taking place in India.
No, Lactalis is one of the key pillar of their business model. Our business model is acquisition. Lactalis has acquired more than 100 companies in the last 15 years and become a global #1. As far as India is concerned, you are right that after this crisis, and there is more opportunities, I would say. And Lactalis is always looking for more acquisition in India, even without COVID period. This was our plan to keep acquiring companies to cover all the geographies. So if you see our acquisition in India in last 5 years or 7 years, it is very strategic in terms of the completing the portfolio, completing the geographies, completing the channels. So all these things are very, very systematically designed acquisition, and I'm quite sure that within a couple of years there will be more acquisition, and there will be some opportunities after this distress period of COVID. You're right.
Yeah, great. Chris, did I hear you right? I kind of wanted to hear you respond to Didier's comment about the U.S. sort of seeing bottlenecks and him not seeing really much in the infrastructure bill that really looked like it was going to alleviate those. Is that your view as well? I mean, it kind of seems like I heard you say we just kind of have to wait this out and see how it goes. I mean, there's not really a silver bullet because any infrastructure investment you do is going to take years and years to come online anyway, to be built and to be integrated. So is it a wait and see thing now?
I don't think so. I mean, part and like Didier said, if it's not there, it got to be pushed in there, and companies will have to push it in there. Whether it now, I think it needs a holistic approach. You can now go and enlarge the capacity of a port, be it Savannah or LA, but that doesn't solve the problem, right? Just like the government talked to the port of LA and they agreed 24/7. They were more or less operating 24/7, and even if they operate now on a higher volume or whatever, if there is no trucks to load the containers,
right,
they can work 36 hours, and it still wouldn't help, right? So I think one has to really look at it. How do we have a top supply chain in a country? And US is a sample. I mean, Europe has similar problems. And how do we get there, and what investments are required from the private sector as well as from the government, right? Didier talked on the rail, right? And why does it just have to be LA where 40% of the volume goes through? Can I not look at alternative entry points to distribute a little bit the load, so when you have a crisis like this, it's less critical, right? And I think you definitely have to find an alternative to pure trucking. I don't think it makes sense to truck goods thousands of kilometers across the countries, especially.
I think it's interesting because it's not even in the public debate. That's why I mentioned it. In Europe, I'm reading a lot of articles in France about using the river, the Seine River between Paris and Le Havre, which is the biggest port in France, right? Here, you don't even hear about it, and you almost feel like people don't dare talking about it. Democrats don't want to because they think that people are going to think that it's federal, how do you say, overreach, right? And that is a private sector issue, and the private sector doesn't have the size, the money to invest in alternatives to trucking. Plus, obviously, the size of the country is an issue. So nobody talks about it. So I don't see how it will improve, which gives an opportunity to autonomous driving. And I will give just a little funny fact. 3 years ago, I was talking to a 20-year-old, and we had a huge argument because he was saying autonomous driving in trucks is going to kill millions of jobs of truck drivers. And of course, I was saying, well, eventually, things will work out, right? It will replace truck drivers maybe, but it will be progressive and all that. And fast forward 3 years later, I think there's a whole generation of young people that did not go or doesn't want to go in truck driving because why would you, right? So I think autonomous driving companies have done an amazing job from a marketing standpoint to sell their business plan, and they freaked out everybody, except that autonomous driving is not ready. So now it's almost a self-fulfilling tale where, oh, look, now you need autonomous driving. And, and then they get more investments. But of course, in the meantime, there's disruption.
Interesting. I don't know if I think Ani has one question. If he wants to come in and ask that last question.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. This is a very fascinating topic, of course. Sure. So, we have, fortunately, we have speakers with expertise in 3-4 countries. Didier, I'm counting you for France and US, and Chris in Southeast Asia, Germany, and USA, and Rahul, of course, in India. In your experience, a lot of us, public, who were not in the middle of the supply chain crisis like you guys have, we heard that it started because of COVID from China. And a lot of blame, as Rahul mentioned in his presentation also, at least in India, went towards China, a lot of ire, maybe in US also. But we also understand that China was the first country to take handle of the situation, which, purportedly speaking, it got created because of, COVID coming out from their lab. So the situation, what I'm trying to ask you is, which country, in your opinion, handled the situation relatively well and was prepared?
Loaded question. I mean.
See, this was a topsy-turvy journey, but I would say, as far as India is concerned, we had a big issue in second wave. There was a big collapse of the system, no oxygen, no ventilator, people had no medical, this thing. But the government of India has done a tremendous job in terms of, vaccinating, because that was the only cure, only defense to avoid third wave or subsequent waves. And the way they have done 1 billion vaccination in this year, I think that is, I would say, a lot of preparedness in countries like India, where you have to go into the rural villages, rural towns, with the cold chain of vaccines, with the skill of the people to vaccinate the people, and then attracting people to come for the vaccination. I think that from that angle, India has handled that situation after learning from second wave. I think that is remarkable.
I don't know if any, to answer your question, Andy, I don't know if any country really handled it very well. I think it magnified all the issues that you can have, and especially the
How about New Zealand?
Yeah, New Zealand might be the only one, but even look at Germany, which handled it pretty well, right? In terms of COVID cases and all that. Well, yesterday they had 60,000 cases in one day. So yes, you're right. New Zealand might be the exception. But all the other countries, including Singapore and a lot of others, which were doing well and were prepared because they had obviously SARS and all that, it's such a globalized economy that I'm not surprised that it's an island state like New Zealand that basically, created a blockers around them that did well. But otherwise, I don't know if you can really do well when there's a globalized crisis, especially when there's no globalized answer.
Chris?
I would say, I wouldn't have said New Zealand. I would have probably picked Taiwan. I think with some maybe negative points, I think they've handled it extremely well. Simply because I think of most of the countries, or compared to most of the countries, I think they were the best prepared. They had the most learning out of the previous small it wasn't a pandemic, more epidemics in Asia. And at least from a health aspect, I think they were probably one of the countries who reacted and managed it extremely well, right? Probably so did Singapore, but you know that Singapore is a city-state, so it's probably a different. I don't want to say an easier challenge, but maybe a different challenge than if you have a large country like USA or China, right?
The question is really: do we think that the next crisis will be handled better?
Right.
Now that we know, right? Which
No,
I honestly don't think so. But
you know, from this conversation point of view, obviously some countries, Taiwan, New Zealand, South Korea, Australia, you know, US, India, you know, we have had different models. If somebody studying those models, okay, we had this now after 100 years, and it basically killed, I mean, a lot of people, a lot of, you know, economy has been hurt. So how do we get ready for the next one? And I'll lead this to John, because I know he's been silent for almost an hour.
which is unusual.
Yes. John, you're on mute, sir. You're on mute, John.
You're on mute, John.
I don't know whether by choice.
How do we preserve our global supply chains, which are essential in terms of PPEs and movements of vaccine products, and at the same time anticipate what the next, you might ask the question, has the WHO done a good job? I read in German and French news that we're getting ready for the fifth wave. I think Didier mentioned that. I really would like to sort of give kudos to India, given the size of the country. India not only vaccinated a large number of people and exerted government policy wisely, but also created its own vaccine, which at first it shared with Africa generously. And I think Rahul, you confirmed that, right?
Yeah, exactly. We donated a lot of vaccine to African countries. You know, because we were not people were not there to get the vaccine in India, so there was a good amount of vaccine. But after that, you know, we developed our own vaccine, which is now 1 billion vaccine has been done in 1 month ago, and so that has at least, you know, it is in India, the 5 most populous state, which is almost 50% of total India population, maybe 600 billion population. Today, the number of cases are in less than 100, all put together. So we have a number of cases, 11,000, 12,000 cases, but they are very pocketed, you know, in very pocket. So I believe that vaccination in countries like India, to looking the condition of India, I think it's a good job. Which only solution, I would say, rather than, because we could not handle any medical emergency as a second wave and third wave. That was out of question. There was no medical facilities. So it was only option, yes.
So that the crisis, the health crisis, was revealed that in fact the global supply chain was not that effective. We got fooled by globalization 2.0, 3.0, and rapid movements of products and physical goods in sea, air, and rail. And the crisis revealed how weak the global infrastructure in terms of movements really was. I'm wondering if the US infrastructure bill approved last week will provide some alleviation of the problem. I think it's Chris who mentioned, you know, why this over concentration of entry and exit from one single port on the West Coast, LA? Why not a better distribution? That's puzzling. Maybe it's a lack of planning, maybe a lack of central planning. It's a US specific question, I suspect.
Yeah. Well, John and everybody else, truly thank you, Chris from Asia, Didier from Atlanta, and Rahul from Chennai, India, and Trevor from Global Atlanta. Thank you very much. It was a fascinating topic, and we look forward to having a repeat of this in an expanded version sometime soon.